Y'all, I could not be happier. I ordered hair care products and they are out for delivery, and I'm just so excited because I've never looked forward to washing my hair as much as I have right now. Like, I usually put it off for longer than I want to admit to the internet. So yeah, and this just feels like hay. It's that dry. So I'm just super excited. Hey guys, thanks for coming back to check out another video. So what are we gonna do today? I thought it would be fun to kind of like do a shop our stash kind of thing. So these are 5 palettes that I really want, but that I low-key already own. So I do have to give credit to Laura for this. We were talking over Instagram about a ColourPop release and how it was pretty, and there were a few shades in the palette that caught our eye, but that we already have other palettes that look so very similar to it. So why add more of like the same thing, you know? Like, I'm all for adding in what you want that you think would add value to your collection. But when I sit back and look at it, these top 5 palettes that I've really been pining after, I already own something so very similar to them. And I know I've said in the past too, like when I dupe a palette, I really like to use my singles and depotted collection to get more use out of them. But sometimes, to be honest, that's just a hassle. And in my head, I'm like, okay, yeah, you might own them all as singles, but it would be nice to have them all in an already pre-made palette. So that's why I shopped my stash for palette dupes instead of doing it with my singles this time. And I just thought it was really interesting to see. I have tried every time I have wanted one of these 5 palettes, I pull out my dupe for it, and I'm quite satisfied. So I hope that you are interested in seeing like what palettes I have been pining after and what I'm using to dupe them. And maybe you've wanted some of the same palettes that I have wanted and you own something very similar in your collection. So let's just get right on into it. First though, I do have to say, we are in the midst of it being like a gloomy, cloudy day is what I was trying to say. So it's really dark in here and I do have the ring light on. I don't like using it just because it causes like distracting shadows on this wall, I feel like. And then whatever I go to show you, I feel like the ring light does wash it out just a little bit. So it's not my favorite. But the day before yesterday is when I filmed swatches of all of these palettes to insert clips of. So hopefully I haven't looked at them. Hopefully those turned out okay and they look better than like how you're gonna see the palette now. So okay, without any further rambling now, we can get right on into the video. So the first palette I want to talk about is, actually let me scoot over that way I can insert pictures. The first palette that I want to talk about though, I'm sure a lot of people have like been pining after this. It's the Natasha Denona Glam palette, and I have to say this one gets my heart fluttering every time. And I love that it's one of her $65 palettes because I think that's a great price point. I just couldn't justify $129. I'm sorry, I just couldn't. But I also feel like since it's cool tone, that's why it pulls at my heartstrings so much, is like we just don't see a lot of cool tone palettes. Like we see more of them now than we have in the past, but I still feel like we see a lot more neutral or warm neutral or just warm palettes in general. So anytime a cool tone palette comes on the market, I'm like, I gotta have it. And I don't really wear cool tones all that much. I have enough cool tone shades in my collection to not, and the amount of times that I do wear them, I don't need to bring in any more, if that makes sense. So the palette that I've shot my stash for to replace the Glam palette from Natasha Denona actually comes from Persona. It's the Persona Identity palette. So I'm going to open it up for you. This is what it looks like on the inside. I absolutely love this palette. I love this formula. I feel like this brand, I felt like I heard a lot about them and then they kind of fell off the radar. Like I'm not sure what happened there. But I really do love the shimmer formula of this palette specifically. They're so soft and easy to work with, and they look so foiled on the eyes with like no effort put in behind it. So I know that this is not like a spot on dupe for the Glam palette. Like I know in the Persona palette, it has like this kind of camel brown and then this red shade. But I still feel like this is a pretty good spot on match, especially for a palette. And every time I have pined over the Glam palette, I have reached into, done a look with this one, and I feel like I come up with something so similar that I would create with the Glam palette. So I'm really happy that I have this instead of buying that. I'm happy that I found that. So palette number 1. Okay, palette number 2 that I have been pining over. I think a lot of us were pining over this one because the packaging was so cute, and it's a green color story, and you know I love my greens. Okay, that's no surprise. So the Baby Yoda palette from ColourPop, or no, it's not the Baby Yoda palette. That's just what we're all collectively calling it. The Child palette. That, when I first saw it, I was like, yes, greens, give me more. But to be honest, I'm bleeding greens. I could eat a few green eyeshadows and y'all wouldn't even miss them. So what I looked for in my stash was a palette that was predominantly green, and I don't have a ton of those. I have a lot of green singles and a lot of green shades, and the dogs are gonna lose it again. All right, Jasper is in the room with me now, and he gets so amped and it takes him forever to settle down. So you might hear some little boofs from him. Either way, I was saying, while I don't have a lot of green specific, like monochromatic color stories like ColourPop has been doing, I do have a lot of green shades, be it in singles or just like sprinkled throughout a palette. So the palette that I have found that really satisfies the itch for the Baby Yoda palette has been the BH Cosmetics Avocado Toast palette. And I know that when you're looking at them, it doesn't look like they would be, like this would be a good dupe for it. But in the swatch clip, I have only swatched out 9 shades from this palette that I feel like do dupe the Baby Yoda palette. So, and yes, that's what I'm going to call it. So anyway, I feel like though, once you just see those 9 swatches, you do get the idea, you do get the vibes that this palette is so similar. And honestly, I like the BH Cosmetics formula more than ColourPop, I think. And then too, with this Avocado Toast palette, they've included some really nice like complementary shades. So like the pinks, or like this nice yellow, or like the red and the brown and then a black. So I feel like you can get way more looks from this palette. Now, yes, you could say that too because there's more shades in here than the other one, but it's having those complementary colors. And that was one thing that it really opened my eyes to. I don't own any of the monochromatic palettes from ColourPop, and I don't think that I would get a lot of use out of them if I did own them, because I feel like I would just be repeating the same eye look over and over, and then the thrill of having that palette would wear off quite quickly. So this is what I've shopped my stash to replace the Baby Yoda palette. All right, the next one that I want to talk about comes from Lorac. Now, it's no surprise that I love Lorac. I own quite a few of their palettes. So when they dropped the Noir palette, I was like sold. And again, it's because there's cool tone shades in there. Like I think they also dropped one called Soleil, but it's much more warmer than the Noir palette. So the Noir palette, even at the top, it does have like a row of warm shades, but I feel like predominantly it's a cool tone palette. So again, it's tugging at my heartstrings for all the same reasons that the Natasha Denona Glam palette is. But if I look into my palette, I have the Urban Decay Naked too. And so again, I don't think this is like a spot on dupe. If anything, I think this is the one that is like I'm reaching for the most, if that makes sense. But if I look at it individually, like individual shades, a lot of the shades in the Noir palette that catch my eye are those like darker purples and silvers, and this palette offers them. This palette also offers some of those like warmer neutrals, but it's specifically the shades down here that I think really help satisfy the urge and have kept me from buying the Noir palette. I have had the Noir palette like in my Ulta cart so many times that it's not even funny. But every time I do that, I take it out and then I go and I like play with the Urban Decay Naked 2, or even sometimes too, I do play with the Persona Identity, just a cool tone palette in general. And I really feel like that helps to satisfy that craving. And this palette, I love this palette, so I want to show it more love. I don't want to add something else into my collection that would take away from this palette. So all right, the next palette that I have been pining after has been the Juvia's Place, the Taupes palette. And I think it's more, I can't say why this color story keeps getting me, because I know that I have this over and over again. I think it's more that, one, I just really like these colors, but two, I really like the Juvia's Place shimmer like their shimmer formula. So it's the Taupes palette that I've had my eye on. And I think too, another reason is because it is a neutral palette and I like seeing all those like browns and taupey colors together, but it's a palette that does lean more cool tone. So instead though, I have found that I can pull out my ColourPop Going Coconuts palette and achieve like very similar looks and get the same vibe that the Taupes palette would give me. So I especially think the shimmers in here are really not, I do like the shimmers in here, although these top two, Palm Reader and Cocoa Crush, can be a little bit flaky, but I think if you know that going into it, you're less mad about it that it is that way, if that makes sense. So, but yeah, anytime I have wanted like a nice, just simple taupey look, I just reach into this palette and I feel like I accomplish the same thing that I would with the Juvia's Place palette. And again, I think it's more just that I've fallen in love with Juvia's Place in general, that I really want that palette, but I don't need it. Okay, so the last palette, I think this one has been on the market for the longest. It's from Dose of Colors. It's the Cutting Edge palette. It's their 6-pan like green palette. Now let me first say, I have never tried Dose of Colors, so I don't know like what their shadow quality is like or anything like that. Because that is one thing, like, how do I say this? Like, if it's a brand that I've never tried, I'm open to getting a palette from them that I might already have a lot of similar shades of, just to try it, because I would rather play it safe and get a color story that I know I'm gonna love than venture out into something new, if that makes sense. But again, it's a green palette and I am bleeding out greens. So I'm pretty sure, did I already say it when we did the child palette, that I could eat green eyeshadows and you guys probably wouldn't miss it? Again, I tuned myself out. But to scratch the itch of the Dose of Colors palette, I've been reaching for my Kaleidos Sci-Fi green palette. I absolutely love this palette. I love the Kaleidos formula. Their shimmers are so like foiled and just, again, it's kind of like with the Persona formula, they're just easy to work with and they're effortless. You don't have to put in a lot of work to make it look good. And the mattes in here, they're so like soft and easy to work with. Even the darker shades, like a lot of times I find that when I'm working with darker matte shades, they take a little bit of extra work, like a little bit of extra blending, but I don't really find that with the Kaleidos formula. So I've just really, this is probably one of my top palettes, if I'm being honest, like if I had to rank them all. And then too, I don't know what it is, because they're both just little 6-pan palettes. So I think it's just the way Kaleidos has arranged this palette. Like I love like kind of this gradient effect that you're almost getting. And then I like the, like I feel like the packaging makes these colors pop a little bit more. So I feel like this color story is actually better than the Dose of Colors one. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, so anytime I've wanted that Dose of Colors palette, I have just been pulling this one out instead. So that's it. That is my 5 palettes that I have been wanting, but that I am not going to purchase because I already own them in some way or another. I hope that you guys really enjoyed this. I hope it encourages you to like shop your stash and see what things that you already have in your collection. And that's not to say, like, if you want to go out and like buy whatever it is that you've got your heart set on, like by all means do it. Like, we are not here to judge, but I just enjoy shopping my stash in order to keep down on the numbers, because if it were up to me, I would own every single palette in the world, and that's just not feasible. So I hope you guys are having a good day or a good night or a good whatever, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.